We have, of course, Darren joining us. Darren, good morning. Thanks for your time this morning.
Good morning. Well, how are you guys?
Fantastic. Good to have you. And happy holidays also. I'm guessing it's also a Muslim holiday in the east of the continent this morning, is it?
It is. We're just having normal day, rainy, and yeah, it's just Eid day, normal Eid day.
Oh. Okay, all right. Okay. Let's get into conversations this morning. Give us an update regarding the current status in Kenya after President Ruto's order for his team to heed the opposition's demands. Are there any new developments on the planned talks?
Well, a meeting happened yesterday, and what happened is that the two sides actually, there are two types of meeting that happened. Previously, the Kenya Kwanza, which is the group by Raila Odinga, had demanded that they don't want to go through a parliamentary process because in Parliament, I mean, the majority of the Parliament is actually the Azimio group didn't want to go through the parliamentary process because the Kenya Kwanza guys are the majority in Parliament. So they felt like, why don't we have these talks outside Parliament to be much more free, fair? And they also put some conditions that the two members that the Kenya Kwanza or the ruling government had chosen to represent them who among the 7 people on that committee actually belong to the opposition, but they were going to talk on behalf of the government, and they felt that that is not fair because they are simply votes in scheme. So they felt that those have to also be removed from that committee so that they can have this meeting. So 2 meetings happened. The one that went to Parliament because they also accepted that they can go ahead with that one for the parliamentary direction, but also have the one with the select committee of 14 people to also have a discussion separately. And they didn't come to a conclusion on exactly what they wanted to, how they should move around with the roadmap to the conversation. But at least one thing we know is that the government has accepted all talks with the opposition. And at least one of the grounds that they wanted to have most is when it comes to the members or the selection or the discussion on who represents or who is going to be in the leadership of the IEBC, which is the electoral body committee, that is in charge of the elections in Kenya. And one of the things that they were discussing, at least what the opposition wanted here, is that can they have the 4 members who were put off, were laid off, reinstated? It's just one of those conversations that they wanted to introduce in there, but also open the servers to discuss the high cost of living and all the rest. But so that is the ground that they want to have the conversation with. And Ruto's side are saying, okay, if we want to have this conversation this way, we need a roadmap. But they still didn't hit there was no groundbreaking really in the conversation. It was just one of those that throwing around brainstorms here and there. One thing that came out and the updates that I got today is that the members of Parliament, now the other meeting through the parliamentary process, think that the 2 leaders should actually meet and have a conversation rather than setting up committees that are going to heckle each other, have a discussion from a sensational point of view and, may not come to an agreement. So how about they broker a deal between the 2 leaders to have a conversation, which Ruto is very open to, by the way, because he came out and said he can actually have a conversation with Raila. But he did not indicate when it's going to happen or whether they have actually accepted to set up that kind of meeting. So it looks like we are going to have 3 different meetings. One by the parliamentary process, which has members of parliament from both sides. 2, a select committee of 7, both from Azimio and Kenya Kwanza. And also, if the possibility happens that Ruto meets actually Raila and have a conversation. But one thing Ruto made very clear is that they will not give him an opportunity to work in government.
So hopefully that meeting could lead to a handshake that we've all been waiting for. But you know what? We're just going to wait till it happens because like the paper said, the MPs have handed it back to them. It's much more like saying, guys, you two are respected men, go and solve the problem. But you know what? Let's move to somewhere in Northern Africa and see how it's affecting the East. I mean, I forgot to ask Southern Africa how the current situation in the North is also affecting it. But Violence erupted in Sudan, by the way, yes, like we know, between the army and paramilitary rapid support forces, RSF. Now, this has posed threats to the progress made towards achieving civilian rule in the country thus far. The presidents of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, and not forgetting Kenya as well, Ruto, Djibouti, have commented on the conflict in Sudan. Now, what is their stance on the issue, and what are the implications of this war for the East African nations?
I will give you a history. Before South Sudan seceded off the main Sudan to become the youngest nation in Africa, there was quite a lot of war, civil war in there. Until South Sudan broke off, but it created a lot of impact on Uganda and Kenya and Ethiopia in terms of the refugee status and a lot of insecurity along those borders. And we thought, okay, maybe that is going to resolve one of the issues in that region, but still South Sudan continues to have issues in the country where you have, basically a civil war and an unrest there because of the parties not agreeing with each other most of the time, not having a peaceful transition into, or having a democratic process in the country. Now, if this goes ahead and happens again in Sudan, like we are seeing right now, there's a huge refugee pressure that is going to happen in the East African states here. Remember, the 7 countries that are actually neighboring Sudan also have conflicts. You talk about Ethiopia, where actually Ethiopians were running to Sudan for refugee status. They were running to Libya, which is also not a stable country. You can't go to Chad. You can't go to Central African Republic, where actually also harbors so many African armies like Rwanda, Uganda is there, and others trying to, keep peace in those countries. So Sudan finds itself in a place where, or even the people feel like, now where do we go next? Now Uganda and Kenya happen to be the best options because Uganda actually has the biggest number of refugees in Africa. So they feel like this would be the safest place, or Kenya would be another option where they would go. And this is not something that Kenya or Uganda want to go through because Kenya already has economic issues. Uganda has its own instability issues. So you don't want to have a number of people, again, coming to these countries and it becomes a problem. The worst thing about this war, and President Museveni actually came out and said that, look, this is between the military officers. It even has nothing to do with the civilians in there. Remember when Hamdok was arrested, the prime minister of this, who was actually the leader now on the civil, as a civilian, he was arrested because probably they didn't agree on the direction and the map on how they elect the next leader. And it never, afterwards, he actually resigned. So it never, the objective of having him there never materialized. So we actually thought that these two leaders are going to come up and make peace and make the country maybe go into a transition and have a democratic process. Now see where they are. It is war, and it's along the Nile Basin. They are part of the Nile Basin. And you know what the Nile means to so many countries: Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia, up to Egypt, that side. So there's a fear that it's going to cause another civil unrest along that line, because the Egyptians cross into Sudan to protect the Nile. The same way the Sudanese want to protect the Nile. The same thing Ethiopians want to protect the Nile because they have the biggest dam and water flows from the Nile. So it now goes beyond the interests of Sudan as the people of them, and it starts to affect the other countries which share the same resources like the Nile. So the President Museveni, President Ruto, and the President of Djibouti are really calling on to these two leaders in the army to cease fire, have a conversation since they're part of IGAD. And I see huge involvement of President Yoweri Museveni into this to see that it actually comes. And unfortunately, none of the leaders has actually made way in there, but I've just made contact with them, the two leaders. But there's another invisible hand that we need to watch out for. I see USA making statements and Russia making statements. Could they have an invisible hand behind the war that we are seeing there? Mm-hmm. We shall know.
Well, like I always say, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we may not be aware of, that may be causing some of all these issues. But we'll see. What's most important, I think, is peace in Sudan and peace in in the whole of the continent. Now let's move to Uganda and talk about the corruption probe there. There have been 2 more ministers that have been arrested and charged to court for allegedly stealing relief items that were intended for vulnerable communities in Karamoja. Can you tell us who these ministers are and what exactly their role was in this scandal? And finally, are there any indications that there will be more arrests to come?
Now, the three ministers so far who have been arraigned in court include Kitutu Goret, who was actually the minister in charge of Karamoja, and then her deputy, Nandutu, who a former journalist, by the way. This is her first time in office, and see, she's already implicated in such scandals, has also been arraigned, and also one for planning, the state minister for planning, Amos Lugolobi, who actually had the iron sheets put on his private property, a shed for animals in his village. Those three have been already arrested, and that we can say the Minister of Finance, the Speaker, the Prime Minister, the second Prime Minister in charge of East African Affairs, all those have been implicated in this scandal, and they have been returning the iron sheets to police, but the police has been receiving them and registering them as, of course, evidence and criminal property. We cannot be so much sure about who else is going to be arrested, but one thing we know is that we expect more arrests. But these three, looking at their role in it, is that one was a minister in charge of the region where the relief items were supposed to be taken, and she took the highest number of iron sheets, which are about 9,000. And she's the one who actually distributed them, signing them off to other ministers. Another was a deputy. I mean, they all fall in the same line. So it was easy for them to share these items between them because they're the ones who are actually in charge of the property. But then the other, Amos Lugolobi, the only gentleman who has been arrested so far, used stolen material and willingly and actually knowingly that this property was supposed to go, there were relief items and they were supposed to be used for a different purpose. He roofed his private shelter for his goats in the eastern part. So it was easy to capture these because they had actually used the material that was already stolen. The evidence was overwhelming against them and they have been put there. So the action that we are not very sure about, the president is very tricky. He called these political crimes and he's going to deal with them as political punishments. Now, that is different from the judicial system. What is political crime and what is political punishment according to him? Is he going to fine them? Is he going to drop them? The conversations around reshuffles have been happening, but he's silent on them as for now, apart from the statement he made calling them political crimes and political punishment. But what is going to happen to the other ministers, because there were over 8 plus some MPs, so what is going to happen to all of them? Is he going to still reshuffle them, drop them, send them out of office or suspend them for some time and then return? The president is a little bit tricky because he has done this before. We've seen ministers being arraigned in court for almost the same charges, but misusing government funds. And he later on again gives them ministerial roles after some years. So
time will tell.
That he uses.
Time will tell. What's
what a political punishment it is.
Yeah, I would say time will tell, how this turns out, but I think there's, some positives to it to see that there was or has been an investigation. People have been arrested. People have, been sent to jail. I remember in Nigeria in 2020, there was, of course, and now talking about relief materials being stolen, Nigeria had, millions and millions of, relief materials that were meant to be given during COVID, locked up in warehouses, and nobody, till date was prosecuted for, of course, those, crimes. But Darren, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's always interesting hearing your views on the East African stories, and we look forward to seeing you again next week, Friday.
Welcome.
Thank you.